Ta-da!
J Reviews, he plays lots of games. J Reviews, he is cool.
Hey guys, welcome to J Reviews. Well, it's the end of the year, so I figured that I'd try some new kind of game for once, while also wanting something that would match with the wintertime. What I have here, new and in the box, is Eskimo Bob for the NES, starring Alfonso. Okay, so I do NES games all the time, so what's so special about this? Well, this NES game was actually made very recently. Yeah, they're actually what I think you'd call a homebrew. This brand new NES game comes in the box and even has its own manual. Yeah, this thing is really legit. In fact, I don't think I've ever held a brand new NES game in the plastic before. Kind of feels like it'd be a shame to open it. Luckily, this game is also available for Steam at a very low price. Well, without further ado, let's check this game out. It may be hard to imagine today, but there was a time when YouTube didn't exist. That's right, before the internet was dominated by Let's Players and vloggers, many people found entertainment in the simple flash cartoons of the early 2000s. Among these classic cartoons, of course, is Eskimo Bob, which made its debut in 2001 on the biggest animation sites of the time. The show features the everyday lives of fish-loving Bob and his friend Alfonso, who has an affinity with the stick that he carries around everywhere he goes. The show features a variety of characters that range from animals that you might find in the Antarctic to oddities that can't really be explained out of context. Eskimo Bob is kind of similar to that long-running Homestar Runner series, in that you might not find the appeal in any standalone episode, but as you watch more and more, the style of the humor grows on you, and the characters become more endearing. You might be asking, why did a relatively obscure 15-plus-year-old web series suddenly get turned into its own NES game? Well, the creator wanted to, and why not? The menu is your standard NES fare with New Game, Continue, and Password. But interestingly, it also has an option to view the manual. This is a nice addition for those that don't own a physical copy, but of course, there's nothing like flipping through the actual booklet. Here we get the story, a description of our heroes and their abilities, and the various enemies that you'll be facing throughout the game. The story is that Bob and Alfonso's good pal the seal has gone missing, so they set out to find him. Sure, it's kinda basic, but it gets the job done. The game plays as a side-scrolling platform puzzle game, and the goal of each level is to collect all the fish to progress, all while avoiding the many enemies and obstacles. If anything hazardous hits you even once, you lose a life, and then you have to start the level all over. You play as both Bob and Alfonso, who you can switch between using these igloos. Bob has a stronger jump and can break ice blocks of snow beneath him. Alfonso has a weaker jump but can attack enemies with his stick and break blocks of snow in front of him. This means you have to utilize both characters in order to make it through many of the stages. Assuming you're using an NES controller like I am, there's only 2 buttons plus the D-pad to move. A lets you jump, while B allows each character to perform their unique actions. Besides that, characters can also duck and crawl with the D-pad. The levels start off extremely simple to ease you into the gameplay, but eventually become quite difficult with more and more complex puzzles and challenges. Fans of the series will recognize most of the enemies who stay satisfyingly true to character. For example, Maurice the pigeon flies across the screen and will purposely poop when passing over you, turning around to repeat the process whenever bumping into a wall. The game does a great job with gradually ramping up the difficulty with each level. For instance, at first Maurice isn't much of an issue and can be avoided easily during the earlier stages, but later on you start being forced to walk on higher platforms that make it seemingly impossible to avoid his droppings. Another thing I like about this game is that while we see the same enemies and objects start to repeat themselves after a while, it still manages to change things up from level to level. Some levels focusing more on the puzzles, while others start to resemble platforming challenges. If you're used to playing Super Mario, the controls may seem a tad stiff at first, as with many puzzle platformers, but the gameplay is actually quite solid once you get the hang of it. There may be times when you're wondering how to avoid a certain obstacle or enemy in order to grab some fish, but you're unable to take much time to sit and think since you're also constantly avoiding something else at the same time. There's 64 levels in all, and every 16th level you face off against a boss, revealed to be one of the Martians responsible for kidnapping the seal. They look kinda like sentient hot dogs. Using Bob, you must avoid the alternating patterns of the Martian's attack while also making sure not to run into any of the basic enemies that may be in the room along with it. Then you must attack the boss from above. It may be overwhelming at first, but once you figure out the pattern of the room, all it takes is some cautious skill. 4 hits and each boss goes down. Oh, except for the final one, of course. Mr. Mustache Martian here is the final boss, and good lord is he difficult. Instead of having just a straight vertical and horizontal shot like the other bosses, he adds a diagonal shot as well. If that wasn't enough, you're tasked with avoiding the most annoying enemies in the game, which switch out after every 2 points of damage dealt. Remember, just 1 hit and you have to start all over. This is where the live system actually started to bug me a bit. After running out of lives, you're taken back to the main menu, where you must hit continue to proceed back to where you were. While this isn't that big of a deal normally, and many NES games did this anyway, it becomes really frustrating when you're getting into the groove of fighting the final boss and then suddenly you have to wait an extra 5 seconds to get back into the action. At first, the enemy spawns seemed to be completely random. Sometimes they would be out of the way and less an issue, and others they would be right on top of the boss's weak point. I eventually discovered, however, that they seem to spawn depending on where the last set of enemies were before the boss takes damage. Using this strategy in mind, I slowly discovered the best times to attack and damage the boss so that the next set of enemies wouldn't make things any more impossible than they already felt. It may take try after try after try, even after learning all the patterns, but if you keep at it, you should eventually win. This is one of the most frustrating final bosses I've ever faced, but that's exactly what you should expect when playing Nintendo. I must admit that puzzle platforming isn't exactly my preferred genre, which sets a high bar for these types of games to really entertain me. Lost Vikings being the only one I could think of off the top of my head right now. Eskimo Bob was thankfully an enjoyable experience for me overall. I love games with simple concepts that increasingly get more difficult over time, and combined with a solid platforming engine, this game definitely delivered. Some levels took longer to complete than I would have liked, but it always felt satisfying when they were finally completed. This is a puzzle platformer that gets a big thumbs up from me. Good job. Well, my friends, that was Eskimo Bob starring Alfonso. If you're a fan of simple yet challenging puzzle platformers, then I'd recommend you give this one a try. It's pretty fun. Well, this marks the end of 2017 and the final J Reviews for the year. Here's hoping that 2018 turns out great for everyone. So thanks for watching, and see you next year.